a kind of form of devolved power in the regions, a kind of federal system across England. But again, it's not for me to tell the people of England. The people of Scotland didn't want the folk of England telling them what to do, and I'm not going to fall into that either.
Ricky?
Jim used a lovely Scottish word, stramash, which are maybe our people's... No, it's a great word, and you used it correctly towards the British Constitution. We don't have one. And we were about to have a vote there where we would get a very clear-cut answer.
Ricky, I'm going to stop you for a second. Let's go to
but I'll come back to it.
In the Dul Chorlin and Ulanshire, ik referendum nuéis imaloch na halapa, I jaravag agus a feilshachig gunjach. Nai diag mille shachiat lechiat sahoch paper voti I chantag an an referendum skire Chorlin and Ulanshire.
I should say, as a Welsh speaker, I should be picking up some of this, shouldn't I? But I'm going to struggle a little bit. So I think what they'll do is they'll just run through the figures first of all in Gaelic, and then they'll come back on the English. So let's just rejoin it.
The total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Chorlin and Ulanshire area is 19,758. The turnout is 86.2%. Ha anaru imalan de votigen son gach fregert an keist an referendum san skirishaw mar ilenas. Buchar, 9,000 uchiad keher fichet sa coig diag. Chabuchar, 10,000 coig hiad daichet sa keher. An yultug, 9 diag. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer in the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 9,195. No, 10,544. Rejected papers, 19. Vaöver Jultai Marilenas, Voterson and Darregert, Shia, Gunchora Noeran Jultug,
So, just going through some of the reasons for the spoiled papers there in Gaelic and then in English. But look, we've got the figures. 10,544 to the no campaign, 9,195 for the yes. Let's just look at the percentages, and then I'll ask Sarah to point out the big significance of this result. 53% no, 47% yes in the Western Isles, an area where the SNP have traditionally been very strong, 86% turnout. Sarah, just tell us what that means.
That is a very big surprise. This is a strong SNP area. They send an SNP MP to Westminster. The social profile, where there isn't very much deprivation, would tend to suggest, if you look just at social indicators, that people might have been voting no. But the political history of the Western Isles is that they vote SNP, and we fully expected them to vote yes. No have narrowly squeaked it, but well enough that they'll be very, very pleased with that result.
Your thoughts on that, Ricky?
Well, very disappointed, because I think Sarah's right. You would have expected, and certainly knowing people out there, you would have expected a yes result, but perhaps that is the direction of travel. And I mean, I think the thing about Scotland over the last, and Jim will back this up as well, Scotland over the last year or so is probably people are all feeding into the same story, the same narrative, they're watching the same television programmes and they're having the same discussions over the country. There is a sense of Scotland as a nation all talking to itself, so perhaps that will be reflected less regionally and perhaps more nationally.
Okay. We'll have a word with John Curtis in a moment and ask John for his thoughts on Western Isles. But Jim, your response to it?
I'm very pleased. I spent a lot of time, that's not the reason why we've won there, but I spent a lot of time in the Western Isles at a string of open-air public meetings from Stornoway down to Benbecula, about half a dozen meetings in the open air. They were great gatherings and very friendly, very passionate. There are some particular issues there about the fishing industry and the worries that some people would have had there about our argument, but I'm not going to rehash the argument about if we're outside the UK, we're outside the EU and the single market, shellfish and Benbecula and elsewhere. So there's some unique things to the Western Isles, but nevertheless, when you have an SNP MP, an SNP MSP, an independent council, I think they would have expected us to have been in the yes column, and there will be a degree of disappointment, of course, that in the yes side that this has gone no, but I think the main thing, the turnout was very high again. Yeah. And there's a real sort of engagement, so I'm very pleased to be 4-0 up.
86%. Professor John Curtis again joining us. John, your thoughts on Western Isles?
Well, I think Jim Murphy's quite correct in pointing out that Western Isles is somewhat sui generis, and therefore we do have to be somewhat careful about extrapolating from it. And in some ways, it was always a place that pointed in two directions. I mean, first, Jim's quite correct in saying, and this is one of these places where the SNP have long had strength, and indeed it was a place that first elected an SNP MP as long ago as 1970. On the other hand, actually, quite a level of substantial migration from people from south of the border, not much in the way of at least social deprivation, at least as measured by the Scottish Government. So socially, not necessarily the kind of place where you'd expect Yes to do well. But put all that together, you'd still expect Yes to be ahead. And I think of the four results we've seen so far, this probably is the most disappointing for the Yes side so far. We just have to remember, however, not very many voters there. And so far, we've really had the three island councils and the smallest of the councils on the mainland. So we've still got an awful lot of votes to count before anybody starts counting too many chickens.
Indeed, John, and good to point that out. What else are you picking up in terms of the trends so far? What are people telling you from some of these counts?
Well, I think the other thing that we should point out now is that I think some of the claims that have been made perhaps by both sides about the turnout fall flat against the evidence. We heard an awful lot from the Yes side saying that they were going to be particularly successful and getting people out to vote in areas where people normally don't vote. Well, we've discovered that actually the places with the lowest turnout in this referendum, places such like Glasgow and Dundee, are the places where turnout is usually the lowest in Scotland. Conversely, however, some of the arguments I've heard earlier about, well, maybe towards the end, the No side was particularly successful in getting its voters out. Well, the truth is the places where the turnout is the highest, places like East Renfrewshire, East Dunbartonshire, are the places where turnout is always highest in Scotland. So in truth, what we're looking at is, oh yes, the turnout's remarkably higher. It's much, much higher than you get normally in an election or any previous referendum we've had in Scotland. But the pattern of differences between the council areas is a very, very familiar one. And to that extent, at least, I think all we can really say is a lot more people voted in this referendum, but it's not clear that either yes or no were particularly successful at getting people to the polls who they don't normally succeed in getting to the polls anyway.
John, we'll talk again later. Thank you very much. John Curtis there with his latest thoughts. Well, let's have a Lib Dem voice, because Samin Campbell, I think, has joined Andrew Marr at Ingleston.
He has indeed, Hugh, one of the great figures of liberal democracy in this country, and once, if I may say so, the fastest white man on the planet, a man who beat O.J. Simpson on the running track. He joins me now. You've observed these elections for a long time. The Island Council's not very important numerically, not a huge story, but we're now hearing that the Yes campaign are conceding in West Lothian, which is a very big story, if true. Tell us a little bit about West Lothian, why that's so important.
Well, West Lothian, of course, was the hotbed of nationalism. Tam Dael, who was the Member of Parliament for a long time, had to fight off SNP challenge after challenge.
Willie Wolfe, who was the great SNP challenger.
The great
yes.
Willie Wolfe, who was eventually, I think, the chairman of the Scottish National
yes.
Party.
So we
and,
talk
of course, the Western Isles is interesting because the Westminster MP for the Western Isles is also SNP. And in the circumstances, I think the Yes campaign would have expected to do rather better than they have.
There, absolutely. Now, much earlier on in the evening, we heard Simon Jenkins, you may recall, saying that if it was a big no vote, or if it was a clear no vote, actually, in the end, Westminster would revert back somnolently to business as usual. What would be the result of that?
Well, it would be political suicide for the three main political parties in Scotland. We're fighting a
no going back.
No going back. You know, you can't be more public than the front page of the Daily Record, for heaven's sake. And for them to renege on that pledge would be absolutely disastrous. And, I mean, if you want to issue free membership cards for the SNP, then in Scotland, abandon the pledge that you made on the front of the Daily Record just a few days ago.
But you have to work out exactly what the pledge means now, the Westminster parties, which means that you and the Conservatives, there's very, very different traditions when it comes to federalism and a strong centre and so forth, have to thrash out a deal, don't you?
We do indeed. And as a lot of people have been saying over the course of this evening, politics will never be the same again. Well, that's true. And if the context is that it's not like it was before, then there's no reason why any one of the three main parties in Scotland cannot find a reasonable accommodation which allows them to say, jointly and severally to the electorate, look, we have delivered on our pledge.
But if Scotland gets not only more powers, but also the Barnett formula continues, a lot of English voters, never mind MPs, are going to say, well, what about us? Do you think that English votes for English laws is now inevitable?
Well, what I do think is that some kind of federal solution for the whole of the United Kingdom is inevitable. And I'm encouraged in that by Prospect Magazine, the Financial Times and Gordon Brown. Because so long, if you have increased powers for Northern Ireland and for Wales and for Scotland, then the idea that Scottish MPs like me can continue to vote on English education and English health simply is unsustainable. Now, sometimes
it's very interesting to hear a senior Liberal Democrat say that. Yes.
Up here we call it the West Lothian question, but I often say rather tritely, it's the West Belfast question and the West Wales question as well.
Yeah.
The more you devolve power, the less you can argue that it's legitimate for members of Parliament, Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland, to vote on what are essentially English matters.
So for voters fighting their way through the night in England with another cup of coffee or another small malt whisky, whatever it might be, how would that actually look, a federal system? You'd have a single British chamber for foreign affairs, defence, immigration and so forth.
Large-scale economics and, in our view, welfare. Because I'm one of those who recoils at the idea that your pension might be different, whether you live in Eyemouth or Otterburn.
Right.
Both sides of the border.
But below that there would be an English Parliament which was sitting probably in Westminster, and it would be dealing with English education, English health, and that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and you don't need another building because all you can do is say, well, this is the English Parliament for a fortnight or 3 weeks.
You could kick out the House of Lords and use that chamber.
You could certainly do that, and the House of Lords reform could well be part of that package. I mean, the Prime Minister, it said, is making a speech to the nation tomorrow. I'd rather hope he does two things, and if I was advising him, or if he was,
I'm sure he'll be watching and on the edge of his seat.
I should think he's fast asleep. First of all, he should repeat the pledge, and it would be quite sensible if he were to make a little acknowledgement to Gordon Brown and the timetable that Gordon Brown set out. And he should also say to his English colleagues, you will not be left behind. But it's not for the Scots to tell the English what form their devolution should take. The English have got to sort that out for themselves. So, if you like, a two-pronged approach with a little gesture to Gordon Brown.
There's a long way to go, but many people thought we were going to be sitting here tonight talking about the end of the United Kingdom. Instead, what we're going to see is possibly a very, very different United Kingdom.
United Kingdom. That was always inevitable. Once you had, if you like, unlocking, not so much unlocking the key, but bringing into very sharp focus the nature of the United Kingdom in the 21st century, then change was inevitable because everyone accepts that this aggregation of power and influence and resource to the southeast simply is unsustainable in the long term. And if you're a member of Parliament, if I was a member of Parliament for the northeast or the northwest or even the West Midlands or the East Midlands, any of that, I would be complaining about the fact that my region, equivalent, sometimes bigger even than Scotland in population,
Yorkshire's bigger in population
exactly,
terms,
not being properly dealt with.
All right, Ming Campbell, for now, thank you very much indeed. We've heard for a long time the West Lothian question. We may be getting the West Lothian answer, but back to Hugh in the studio.
Andy, thanks very much, and thanks to Sir Ming Campbell too. Before we start again around the table, and before we pick up and see which are the very, very significant councils still to come, because let me repeat, at 3:15 in the morning, we've just had 4 results, so there are 28 results to go. So there is a long way to go. We haven't had Glasgow and Edinburgh and Dundee and Aberdeen and some of the big urban areas. So in the meantime, I'm going to talk to David Coburn, who's an MEP for UKIP, the only UKIP representative in Scotland. David, thanks for waiting so patiently to talk to us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, how are you? I'm
fine, thanks. I'm just wondering, first of all, your sense of how it's going, and then we'll go on to other things.
Well, it looks very much like independence is not going to happen, but we can't tell until we see what's happening in Edinburgh and Glasgow. But I would think it's a good chance that it's not going to happen. And as I've been listening to all this nonsense from various other political parties, UKIP have been talking about this for some time, about rebalancing the constitution, rebalancing England with Scotland, and Mr Farage will be speaking about that tomorrow morning, possibly before Mr Cameron's out of his bed.
Well, we shall see. But I think Mr Cameron will be up quite early as well. But what would you like that answer to be from UKIP? What is it going to be in terms of its proposal?
Well, I'm going to leave that to Nigel to discuss tomorrow morning, but we are looking at a different way of doing things and giving Englanders a decent chance. I don't think it should all be about Scotland. I speak as a Scotsman. I think there's been too much about us, and we need to rebalance the entire constitution, because there are large chunks of England, the north of England, which has been ignored as well. And as you will see in the forthcoming by-election in Manchester, UKIP are now starting to take Labour seats in the north, and we will be taking Labour seats in Scotland before very long as well, because the Labour Party has totally let down the working man in Scotland.
OK, we'll wait to see what Nigel has to say, obviously. But for viewers watching who want, a clear guide, are you talking about an English Parliament? Are you talking about parliaments in parts of England? What are you talking about?
No, I don't think we're talking about parts of England. I think we're talking about a rebalancing of the constitution. I'm going to leave Nigel to go into the minutiae. We have discussed this for a long time. We've been way ahead of everybody else in this, and we couldn't understand why Scotland was getting this without actually having a plan B. It's another case of Mr Cameron writing everything down in the back of a fag packet and signing off with Alex Salmond. Well, that is just not on. Everyone's got to be included in this. What's
UKIP's view on more powers, whatever those powers are, more powers for Scotland?
Well, I think our view generally is if Mr Salmond wants to put a Ferrari in every drive in Scotland, a haggis in every pot, he's going to have to pay for it. And the thing about this is, why should they simply leave this enormous socialist state in Scotland, which has let Scotland down? Young people in Scotland leave the country because you're told you're an evil person because you want to make money, you want to improve your life and that of your family. So lots of young Scots leave the country. Well, I think it's high time we got rid of the leaden hand of the socialist state in Scotland, and let's see some entrepreneurial ideas coming through. UKIP want to have entrepreneurial Scotland, the land of Adam Smith. Why, and Andrew Carnegie, why is it in this sort of mess? Because of years of Labour ignoring it, the SNP with their daft notions, and quite frankly, Liberal Democrats who nobody gives anything for, they simply will cease to exist after the next election. I don't even know why some Min Campbell they bother putting them on TV.
Well, when you talk about rebalancing the relationship between, or recalibrating the relationship between England and Scotland, what do you read as the voter or UKIP supporters? What is their main desire? What would they like to see? Well,
I think fairness for Scotland. If Scotland wants to do something that's more expensive than England or in a different way from England, then obviously UKIP believe in going to the lowest part of the process. We'd rather have more laws given to Holyrood, and also more Holyrood staff given to local councils. We want to see the whole thing brought down to the local level. I think that's what we've always been about. We're a very democratic party, we're a libertarian party, and we want to see change in that way.
And should the Barnett formula be kept or scrapped?
The Barnett formula has got to be up for discussion. I mean, it cannot go on the way it has. We have to do things in a different way, but Nigel will lay that out more clearly in the morning.
And just a final point, David, if I may, was Mr Farage right to accuse Alex Salmond of provoking aggression in the campaign and of, in effect, provoking anti-English sentiment?
Well, I was the man that called him the Robert Mugabe of Scotland. He started off the European campaign that way. People said, oh, that's rather excessive. But by the end of it, he was threatening to seize land in Scotland. Well, that's very Robert Mugabe. He's also threatening businesses. Mr Sillars coming out, threatening businesses, threatening people, threatening revenge against people. I mean, what can I say about it? It's monstrous. The way they've conducted this campaign has been a disgrace. And I don't think many people in Scotland will forgive Mr Salmond, and I think he personally must take a great deal of the blame for that. And in fact, a lot of people personally blame him for this, not just the Scottish National Party as a whole, but very much Mr Salmond as an individual.
Well, we'll get people to respond to that. David, thanks very much for joining us. David Coburn there of UKIP. Well, Ricky?
Well, that's the most absurd 5 minutes I've heard on television tonight. I mean, it really is, because these people are not players in this campaign. They've come here to cause trouble. They are racist, and I believe, quite honestly, they're here to disrupt rather than help the discussion. Now, we were talking before about a coherent policy, this idea that this was some sort of policy here. We were talking before about a constitution. At the end of the vote tonight, we could have been coming towards a Scottish constitution, something which we don't have in Britain. And now that was a very, very clear part of the yes vote, where we're actually talking through democratic process. Now, Jim used the word earlier on, stramash. And this is my worry, that what we've got at the moment is something that was cobbled together a couple of weekends ago and is going to be done in closed rooms, what used to be called smoke-filled rooms. I suppose they're not smoke-filled anymore, Jim, but this is my worry now. What we had on the table was something which was really going to be thought through. And this idea that we have a deal here and a deal there, that doesn't work for me. But I would have hoped at the end of tonight we would have been starting to talk about a Scottish constitution.
Well, picking up on what Ricky said and David Coburn, I mean, David's an example of... I'm not a big fan of proportional representation, and David's an example of it. I hope that's not too impolite. But with those sorts of views, he wouldn't have got elected. But he got elected on the basis that he was on the list. And, I mean, the kind of haggis in every driveway or whatever it was he was talking about, and Robert Mugabe of Scotland, Alex Salmond and I don't see eye to eye with one another, but that sort of thing is pretty ludicrous. But before we get carried away with the kind of cultural conceit of Scottish politics and Scotland being uniquely different from the rest of the UK, 90,000 Scots voted for UKIP. I don't think, you guys will know better than me, but I don't think UKIP got an MEP in London, for example. And the fact that, so we should avoid the kind of cultural conceit that Scotland is spectacularly more open-minded than the rest of the UK.
About 10% of the vote, wasn't it?
Yeah,
10%
but
of the vote
when
in
you
the European elections in Scotland.
But when you consider the fact not only 90,000 people voted, angry people voted for them, but Scotland's been scarred for far too long with, for example, sectarianism, that the rest of the United Kingdom are bewildered by. And we tolerated it for far too long. It still goes on. It's much more under control these days, and that's something to be thankful for. But we shouldn't fall for the kind of sense that Scots are uniquely open-minded and uniquely welcoming. We've spent too much time and too much kind of angst on that type of pointless religious discrimination over the years to get involved in that.
I'm going to stop you there for a second, because Ricky did say some rather serious things about UKIP. And David, you're still with us, I think, aren't you?
I'm indeed, yeah.
Do you want to answer that? Sorry.
Well, all I can say is the Scottish National Party have made a lot of people up here very frightened, especially English people who live up here. Many of them expressed how upset and frightened they are, and the sort of behaviour we've seen against businesses, like Barhead Travel. A lot of people have felt intimidated by the SNP. And the SNP, quite frankly, if anybody's racist, quite frankly, it's the SNP. They don't like the English. They don't care. Anyone can come to Scotland as long as you're not English, or you've ever worked in London, or you're a Scotsman who's ever worked anywhere else in the world. But, I mean, they're a ridiculous bunch of people. And quite frankly, they've just demonstrated their behaviour over this campaign.
Well, that's really sad that that's been described like that tonight, because it hasn't been that kind of campaign here at all.
Oh, yes, it has. That's
well,
absolute nonsense.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
I have many, many friends who are English people who have moved to Scotland, who will be on Jim's side, who will be on the no side, who will be on the yes side, but for very good reasons. But not for reasons that they're intimidated or so on. That is not a side of it. Now, and also to call it an SNP campaign, I'm not a member of the Scottish National Party. Lots of people on the Yes campaign are not members of any party. We just believe in a change for Scotland. And that's quite a big group. Jim's got here, he's got a coalition of people who are on the no side. There's a coalition of people on the yes side as well.
No, there are not.
And
it's the SNP.
Well, I'm sorry, it's not. So it's absolutely not.
David, I wonder if I could defend the SNP for a moment. The company you mentioned, David, Barhead Traveller, in my constituency, I was standing outside it today, and look, actually, as far as I understand it, their business has gone up.
Oh, they
not down since the type of thing that you're talking about. But anyway, look, there's been some aggression in this campaign, David, but it's not been in the mainstream. There's been great passion.
Well, really.
I've had some of it myself. I don't care about egg throwing. There's kind of all that sort of stuff. But in the main, the stuff that you're saying about the SNP isn't true, David. And we've spent 2 years emphasising the things that we have.
The SNP
we have against one another. David, I'm going to just finish this point, and I'm sure you can jump in if you fancy. But we've spent 2 years emphasising our differences here in Scotland, and we've now got to try and spend the rest of our time trying to work out what we've got in common and make a success of whatever Scotland has decided. So let's not try and rerun the referendum. One side won, one side lost. We're just going to make a success of the decision that our fellow Scots have come to in record numbers.
Well, we
kind of
know
not
you intend
rerun
to
the
go
last
into the
2 years,
Scottish
David.
Parliament, so obviously you're starting your campaign for the Scottish Parliament now. We can obviously see that.
That's about the 20th thing you've got wrong in this short interview,
really?
David, but good luck with it,
Watch
mate.
this space.
Good luck. Cheerio, good night.
David, can I just recap just one thing, because it's an important thing. When Ricky mentioned earlier that there'd been a racist element, that's the allegation made. Can you just tell us why you said... I'll ask you now, David. I'm just saying to Ricky, why did you say that?
Because I think what UKIP have brought is brought fear. And they brought fear that wasn't here before. And they brought something which I have never seen, which is a distrust of foreign people. And it's
we
not
won
here.
the
Scotland has
European
been
election,
a
for goodness
welcoming
sake.
country to new people. We welcome it. We've had people, Polish people for yes, Africans for yes, Indians for yes, and it's been a fantastic campaign of the new Scottish people taking part in Scotland. As I say, some of these people have supported the no side, some of them have supported the yes side, but they've been phenomenal contributors to Scotland, and we welcome them. We're delighted to see them here. And I'm sorry, but my children and many, many young people are very distrustful of what you, David, have brought into this.
David,
well, certainly not, because I can just say that UKIP's policy on immigration is the least racist policy of any party, because we want to allow anyone, not just people from the European Union, to come here, but people from India, from the colonies, the old Commonwealth. We want them to have the opportunity to come here, and we want a points-based system like Australia. You can't get more unracist than that. And quite frankly, this man is talking absolute nonsense. Anyone who's read a newspaper in Scotland over the last few months knows exactly what's been happening. And lots of people feel very intimidated by the SNP. And
David,
this nonsense must stop.
We'll talk a little more about the campaign later, but thank you very much for joining us. David Coburn there, the UKIP MEP, one of the MEPs for Scotland. I think it's a good moment for us to just take stock. Where are we with these results? We have 4 results in. We have 28 results to go in this independence referendum. So there's our grand statement. On Pacific Quay, BBC's headquarters in Scotland, in Glasgow here. The yes vote so far, 36,097. The no vote so far, 49,535. But as I say, that's just 4 results. 28 results to go. We mentioned earlier that the eyes of the world were on this result, because it's a hugely significant result in terms of the standing of the United Kingdom. We're joined by Kurt Volker, the former US permanent representative to NATO, who's in Washington. Mr. Volker, thanks for joining us. What is your perspective from Washington tonight?
Well, first off, I think there's great interest in Washington in following these results. It's been a dinner topic conversation here and frankly throughout the day, even on a day when we had the Ukrainian president in town. Secondly, I think that there's a great deal of respect in Washington for the Scottish decision. Whatever the Scots decide, we have a great admiration for Scotland. We'll make it work, whatever that is. But of course, from perspective of some of the bigger security issues, economic issues, things that directly affect U.S. interests, there is indeed a perception in Washington that it is in the U.S. interest that Scotland remain with the U.K., so there's a great deal of hope for that as well. But of course, whatever the outcome is, we will stand by the Scots and make it work.
I'm just thinking of the tweet, the social media contribution from the President Obama, where he said, the UK is an extraordinary partner for America and a force for good in an unstable world. I hope it remains strong, robust and united. Is it appropriate for the President to be, in effect, if you like, I suppose it's a kind of intervention in the campaign, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he's expressing an American interest, and therefore I think it is appropriate for the President of the United States to express an American interest. But I take your point as well. I don't think that anyone in the United States feels comfortable telling the Scots how they should vote. That's really a decision for Scottish voters, and we have to be very careful not to be trying to impose a view on that. We can express our own interest, but we have to respect the Scots and their interests.
Just underline it, Kurt, if we may. If it is a no vote, and as I say, we've got a long way to go here, but if it's a no vote, there'll be a sigh of relief in the White House, yes?
Indeed. In the United States, I think we look at things like, okay, what's NATO? What's the nuclear deterrent of NATO? Where are the Trident submarines? Is the UK able to contribute effectively to the common challenges that we have, such as fighting ISIS, such as dealing with Russia? If the UK is going to be distracted for the next 18 months negotiating over internal arrangements and how to break up the union, we're going to lose a valuable partner. So clearly there's an interest there. And I think it's legitimate for the United States to say this is how we have to deal with the world and what we look for in a strong partner like the United Kingdom. At the same time, there is a very strong sense here, and it's not just speaking for myself, I've heard it around town. People respect the views of voters, and if the Scots decide one way or the other, we will deal with whatever that decision is in the most positive spirit possible.
And just a final point, you brought up Trident there. Was that the main factor in American thinking?
No.
Or were there other strategic factors?
No, it is one among many, and probably not the most important. I think from the United States point of view, we see a lot of global challenges. We are at a stage right now where we are very hesitant about how far we want to go in grappling with them. But inevitably we have to, such as you see with the airstrikes against ISIS now and putting together a coalition to take on ISIS, such as you see with dealing with Russia and how do we help Ukraine and try to put a check on Russia's ambitions to rewrite the map of Europe. And in that, the United States has always relied on the United States as an independent, strong, valuable partner, valuable source of advice, contributor, able to mobilize other things that the U.S. cannot. And that partnership has been tremendously valuable. And the worry in this is that a UK distracted by dissolving the union that has existed until now will be a less effective partner for the U.S. in dealing with global challenges. Trident's a small part of that.
Kurt Volker, very good of you to join us once again, and thanks very much for giving us your view on the American perspective. A quick word from Ricky and from Jim then, and then we'll catch up with our news summary. Jim, the international perspective. So, that didn't really play, did it, in this campaign?
It wasn't the major factor. I think folk were voting on their family, their community, a sense of pride, a sense of what was best for Scotland. There were, on occasions, where the international issues visited the referendum.
Let's turn the question round.
But we couldn't avoid the fact that the things that are happening in Syria and Iraq and the dreadful murder of British citizens and the threat to others, so that would be there. But ultimately, that wasn't the cutting edge of the referendum.
So when President Obama, Bill Clinton, when people like that intervene, if I can use that word, does that have any effect at all?
I think people are interested in it, but I don't think it influences people. So there's interest rather than influence. And the Prime Minister of Australia spoke out in rather strident terms, and that spiked a bit of interest. But I think Scots, I think we like the fact that the whole world's watching. We're not an insecure people, but we like the fact that the world notices. And as I say, it's interest rather than influence this brings.
There were no big game changers. These things did not affect the way people went to the polls. Obama, Clinton, whatever.
Even the Pope.
Even the Pope. I think that one of the great things was this was a great exercise in democracy. We recommend it. I would recommend it to people.
Not too regular.
Maybe not for 2 years. But seriously, I think it was great. And people actually had the discussion within themselves, within their own families, and that was what was healthy about it. It wasn't these big interventions.
Just a quick point. There was a real nervousness in Downing Street that foreign affairs might affect this in the opposite direction, not helpfully for the No campaign. A real anxiety that as those leaders met for the NATO summit in Wales, that the possibility of another war in the Middle East, of course the SNP, along with the Liberal Democrats, but had a history of being able to say they'd opposed the Iraq war in 2003, that would drive people in to the yes camp. And I know that Downing Street spoke to the White House, and this issue of this referendum was a factor. I'm not saying it was the definitive factor, but it was a factor in there being a long timetable for military action in Iraq.
I think we've got a result in.
Ladies
Let's
and
go to
gentlemen,
Inverclyde.
can I have your attention, please? I, John Mundell, Counting Officer appointed for the Inverclyde Council Local Government Area at the Scottish Independence Referendum held on the 18th of September, hereby certify and declare 1. The total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Inverclyde Council Local Government Area is 54,601. The turnout is 87.4%. 2. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Outcome for yes, number of votes 27,243. Outcome for no, 27,329. Rejected,
Look at that.
29.
Well, on a turnout of 87%. Look at those figures. 27,243 yes, 27,329 to the noes. Let's have a look at the percentages, because they will underline that very fragile majority. And let's have a look at the percentages. It's 50.1% to the noes and 49.9% to yes, 0.2%. As I say, on a very high turnout. Inverclyde, Sarah, we discussed it earlier. What are your views on that?
Inverclyde was in the middle of our predictions. It's a small part of Scotland. It's got quite high social deprivation. There's quite high unemployment there. This is the area around Gourock, Greenock, Port Glasgow, where there used to be a lot of shipbuilding, where there isn't as much as there used to be anymore. So there were reasons to think that there might be people who would be tempted to vote yes there. I mean, it's been a traditionally very, very Labour area, but exactly the kind of Labour voters who the Yes campaign were trying to tempt over to their side probably could have been found in Inverclyde. Now, it's a very, very tight result. It's astonishing in that regard, but for no to have taken that, that's not bad going.
Another factor that, forgive me, that Jim mentioned earlier about sectarianism. This is an area, I think I'm right in saying, Jim, isn't it, with the highest Catholic population
there's a very
in
large
Scotland,
Catholic
and
population.
there was an association in large parts of Scotland with Catholics being more likely to vote yes. It was said, now whether that will turn out to be the case I don't know, but it was often said that there was a bit of a sectarian split. Now some of that was associated, I suspect, purely with kind of football supporting, the association with the Glaswegian football clubs, the Celtic Rangers split, but it would be interesting to know whether that was a factor in that seat.
Well, and it's a remarkable fact that whether it turns out or not, that Catholics have voted in large number yes. 20 years ago, you would never have considered that at all. For a very long time, the Catholic vote were very, very solidly unionist. They were very suspicious of what an independent Scotland would look like, thought it would be run by some kind of Protestant cabal, and that we're even discussing Catholics as potentially large numbers of yes voters shows how much things have changed in Scotland.
Well, Inverclyde, let's have your response to it.
One of the things, and again, not Ricky, I'm not trying to draw Ricky into this, but certainly the First Minister didn't miss an opportunity to remind Scots that the Orange Order were in favour of a no vote. I remember doing an interview with them a fortnight ago, and I don't know how many times he said it. Now, I don't think that should be part of our politics. I don't think that's sort of religion.
Didn't help by staging an absolutely enormous march in Edinburgh last Saturday.
In a democracy, if it's within the law, they're entitled to have their peaceful protest. I get in procession, but I guess both of us are delighted that the Inverclyde result isn't the Scottish result. Because if it had only been 100 votes, I don't know about hanging chads in Florida, we'd have been here for a very, very long time.
I'm already shouting the recount on this one, actually, to be honest with you.
OK, let's have a look at some of the images that we have of responses to that. Yeah. That was the scene just a couple of minutes ago when the Inverclyde result came in. I'm going to go straight to John Curtis because John Curtis is standing by to tell us what he makes of that result. John, Inverclyde.
Well, I think certainly this is a further straw in the wind that the no side are going to emerge victorious in this referendum. As you were just saying, this is the kind of place where if the yes side were going to win this referendum, we would require or would expect them to be at least narrowly ahead here. In the end, they're narrowly behind. And given what we're hearing from some of the other counts in places like Aberdeen and Mid Lothian, where we're hearing that the no side again are ahead, these are again places where probably yes would need to be ahead, at least marginally, if they're going to win the referendum. The straws in the wind are beginning to stack up towards no winning. What I think, however, we're still not entirely clear about is how good that victory could be, how large the lead is going to be. But in a sense, we've already heard from a spokesman on the no side acknowledging the strength of the yes vote and to that extent at least reiterating their commitment that Scotland should indeed get more devolution. Indeed, I think I've heard quite remarkably both Ruth Davidson, the Scottish Conservative leader, and Lord Forsyth, who in the 1990s was the arch opponent of devolution, both suggesting that actually the proposals for more devolution for Scotland may well need to go further than anything that's been put forward by the political parties from Westminster so far.
And just looking ahead for the next hour, John, where are those areas where the Yes campaign will have high hopes of maybe, even reversing maybe what's going on?
Well, I think the truth is when we begin to get in some of the results from parts of from the west of Scotland, we're going to have to start seeing Yes victories. And it's also true when we come to places like Perth and Angus, where there's a strong SNP vote, we again need to see Yes victories, which we didn't see in the Western Isles, which is also an SNP stronghold. So look at the SNP strongholds, look at the west of Scotland. If Yes don't start winning there, then it'd be pretty clear that indeed No have won, and maybe have won quite comfortably.
John, thank you very much. And I would like to talk about the places still counting as a useful thing for us to look at this stage. There it is. Then you see the big centres of Glasgow and Edinburgh still counting at the moment. Fife too, which includes Gordon Brown's constituency in Kirkcaldy, and we have North Lanarkshire, South Lanarkshire, Aberdeenshire, which includes Mr Salmon's constituency, the Highland region, Aberdeen itself, that's the city of Aberdeen, which is still to come, West Lothian, which we discussed earlier. We've already had East Lothian in, and Renfrewshire. So there are some very, very big centres yet to come. We're going to pause for a second because I want to join Andrew Neil at Westminster, and then we'll come back and get some more results.
Thanks, Hugh. We're getting reports that Alex Salmond has left Aberdeen Airport in a private jet with his wife, but the destination is unknown, which, of course, has produced some suggestions on Twitter, which there is no way I'm going to repeat on the BBC. We're joined by the economics editor, Robert Peston. Robert, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Sterling rising in the Asian markets. Yep. The equity markets here will probably rise when they open. What are the overall macroeconomic implications if it is a no vote?
If it's a no vote, quite a lot of uncertainty gets eliminated. There was nervousness among investors that the future of the British banking system would be in doubt for a bit. There were genuine concerns about the fiscal implications of a lot of this. And so if it's a very clear no vote, sterling will bounce back, having fallen, and that actually carries... there are also other implications as well. I mean, it was widely thought that if Scotland were to vote no, because there would be it was thought, a depressive impact on the entire UK economy, that would have delayed the Bank of England's decision about raising interest rates. I would say, on the basis of where we're looking in these polls now, an interest rate rise, certainly before the election, remains very much on the cards, possibly as soon as November.
OK, let's look at a couple of things that Westminster has to do if it's to keep its word with the Scottish people of more devolution, if it is a no vote. There's talk of, or there's a promise of more income tax powers being sent to Edinburgh. But I'm right in thinking that Labour and Conservative in particular, they don't necessarily agree on what these powers should be.
No, I mean, it is quite striking that you've had this declaration from the three parties that there will be more powers handed across on a pretty tight timetable. But actually their positions on particularly tax are different. The Tories, interestingly, have said all of income tax can be decided by the devolved Scottish government. Labour has said no. I think they've said something like 3/4 of the income tax decisions will be taken by the Scottish government. Interestingly also, Labour appears to be saying that it'll be sort of one-directional, that if the Scottish government wishes to put up taxes, to protect the health service, for example, they could do that. But there's a sort of suggestion that they wouldn't be able to compete with tax rates elsewhere by cutting taxes. So there is quite a lot of important stuff to be negotiated with big implications for what that, for what a Scottish government would actually be able to do.
I understand that Ed Bowles, the Shadow Chancellor, is not necessarily very happy with this.
Well, I mean, he's obviously thinking that he may end up as Chancellor after the election. We shall see. And, I think his concern is that what Scotland appears to be getting here is, a pretty attractive-looking deal that would restrict his ability to spend elsewhere. In particular, the parties have committed themselves to this continuation of above-average public spending in Scotland as a result of transfers from essentially the southeast of England. It's known as the Barnett formula. And there are some people who say, you can't on the one hand have Scotland with these increased powers to raise taxes, but also being subsidised quite as much by the South. So I think that will be a pretty contentious point, particularly since, let's be clear, Alex Salmond has done a pretty good job over the past few weeks and months shouting to the world, Scotland's a very prosperous nation with above average income per head. And if people believed him, then on that basis, perhaps Scotland shouldn't get quite such a big subsidy.
But the Barnett formula, as I understand it, has enemies on the Labour and Conservative sides.
Oh, no, very much so. I mean, I do think that this pledge by the three leaders of the main unionist parties to sustain it, I think there will be members of all their parties who will try and see if that can be unpicked, a bit. Because at a time when money is going to be tight for the whole UK for years to come, because we've still got a big deficit to cut, some will say that is unfair.
OK, Robert Peston, thank you very much. Let's get back to Scotland Decides.
Andrew, thanks very much. Thanks to Robert, too, for some thoughts there on the economy and finance and currency and the permutations. We've been joined by the Scottish Labour leader, Joanne Lamont, and by Michael Matheson, the Scottish Minister for Public Health. It's good of you to join us.
Morning.
At 4:45 in the morning. And we'll get your thoughts in just a moment. But let you catch your breath, first of all, and let's have a summary of the news.
Hello, I'm Carol Walker with a summary of the main news. The first results in Scotland's independence referendum have been declared. Orkney, Shetland, the Western Islands, Inverclyde and Clackmannanshire have all voted no. The no vote in Clackmannanshire was 54%, with 46% voting yes. Figures suggest the turnout has been exceptionally high. The final result is expected between 6 and 7 o'clock this morning. The Queen's expected to make a statement this afternoon. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
This is what a good start looks like for the No campaign. Lift off for one activist and lift off for those wanting to keep Scotland in the UK. At just after 1:30 in the morning, the first result.
Yes, 16,350. No, 19,000.
And half an hour later, hundreds of miles north.
Yes, 4,883. No, 10,004.
For yes, 5,669. For no, 9,951.
It was a no vote too in the Western Isles. Change is coming everywhere, says the government at Westminster.
If, as we all hope, we can secure enhanced devolution for Scotland in short order, we also need, with a similar sense of urgency, to make sure that other people within the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, in Wales and, of course, in England, have their voices more clearly heard and respected than ever before.
Here, ballot boxes arrived by air from the Isle of Mull, heading for the Argyll and Bute Count Centre. The turnout has been huge. Those arguing for independence say that's because people are angry.
I think people in Scotland have been channeling that legitimate anger about a broken political and economic system into something positive during this campaign. If it's a yes vote, then we clearly have a path forward for that, defining a written constitution, managing the transition to an independent country. If it's a no vote, it becomes much more challenging, but still vital to capture that energy and to make sure that we can build alliances with people elsewhere in these islands who share the anger.
You need a head for numbers and strong fingers for a night in one of the 32 count centres across Scotland. The nocturnal arithmetic continues and will do for several hours yet. Chris Mason, BBC News.
A new video has been released which appears to show a British journalist being held captive by Islamic State extremists. John Cantley, seen here in Syria, was captured while working as a newspaper journalist. In the latest footage, Mr. Cantley is seen sitting behind a desk, dressed in orange clothes, delivering a scripted speech into the camera. A plan to arm and train moderate Syrian rebels to fight Islamic State has been approved by the United States Senate. The strategy forms part of President Obama's campaign to tackle the militants who've taken control of a swathe of territory across Syria and Iraq. 2 adults and 6 children are reported to have been killed in a shooting in Florida in the United States. The shootings took place in the town of Bell, about 30 miles west of Gainesville in the north of the state. Police say a grandfather killed his 6 grandchildren and his daughter before turning the gun on himself. That's it for now. Now let's go back to Scotland Decides.
Welcome back to Scotland Decides. It's just about 10 to 4 in the morning. We have 5 results in. We have 27 to go. I'm told that Renfrewshire is to be declared fairly shortly. Let me tell you, earlier, when the process of running the votes through and looking at the tallies happened, this was the response of the Better Together, the No campaign. And there's no mistaking their joy there. Now, this was just in the past few minutes. So this is in the lead-up, if you like, to the declaration. And there is a hint there, isn't there, more than a hint, of the fact that Better Together in Renfrewshire think that they will have done enough. That is that includes Paisley. That is Andrew Neil's hometown. So that locates it for us. It is, in fact, of course, Douglas Alexander's patch as well. So we should get Renfrewshire quite soon. And Joanne Lamont is with us, the Labour leader in Scotland. Joanne, thanks for coming in again.
Pleasure.
Nice to see you. And Michael Matheson's with us too. Thank you, Michael. OK, Renfrewshire. Are those people right to be hugging? What are you thinking?
It looks, I mean, you know, Scots are pretty undemonstrative. If they're jumping about like that, it would suggest that it's good news on balance. And I think that it looks as if there's potentially a good result there.
In the broad trend of what's been happening, Joanne, this evening, as I say, I'm stressing, you know, in fairness to viewers as well, we do have 27 results left, so we're not sort of going crazy. But what is the trend telling you?
Well, I think it feels to me that it's going to be a no vote. But I think probably what I'm more struck by is that a project started out, would Scotland divide from the rest of the United Kingdom, has divided Scotland.
I'm going to stop you there, Joanne. Let's go to Renfrewshire.
Sure.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, could I have your attention, please? I, David Martin, Counting Officer appointed for Renfrewshire Council local government area at the Scottish Independence Referendum held on 18th September 2014, hereby certify and declare the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Renfrewshire Council area is 117,612. The turnout is 87.3%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 55,466. No, 62,067. There were 79 rejected papers. The reasons for rejection are as follows. Want of an official mark, no papers.
So at 3:52 in the morning, we have our 6th result, and it is from Renfrewshire on a turnout of 87%, a victory for the No campaign, 62,067 votes to 55,466. That means in percentage terms as follows: 53% to the No's and 47% to the Yes campaign. Sarah, your thoughts on that?
Well, this is a much, much bigger area, so the number of votes here matter a great deal more to the total than some of the smaller counts that we've heard already. Renfrewshire, as you say, it's where Paisley is, where Douglas Alexander is the MP, so there's a solid Labour voting tradition there. Like much of Scotland, though, there have been votes for the SNP in the Holyrood elections. They returned an SNP MSP to Holyrood, and it was exactly areas like this where we weren't sure what these voters, who used to be solidly Labour, now quite often vote for the SNP, if not in Westminster elections, what they were going to do, and they voted
Pause you a second, Sarah. Sorry, hold the thought, because we're just getting a declaration from Dundee.
I, David Dorward, counting officer appointed for the Dundee City local government area at the Scottish independence referendum held on the 18th September 2014, hereby certify and declare the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Dundee City area is 93,592. The turnout is 78.8%. There were 92 rejected ballot papers, 1 for want of an official mark, 25 for voting in favour of both answers, 6 for writing or mark by which the voter could be identified, and 60 unmarked or void for uncertainty. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 53,620. No, 39,880.
Well, those are the results in from Dundee, and it is a yes victory in Dundee. And let's look at the margin, 53,620 to 39,880. The turnout significantly lower than we've seen elsewhere. It is 79%. Look at the percentage share, and there you have 57% for the yes campaign and 43% for the no, 14% margin. Sarah, thoughts on that?
Well, it's significant that this is the first place which has returned a yes vote. It's no surprise that Dundee voted yes. Alex Salmond calls it the yes city. It was the city in Scotland he most expected to go yes. It's a good result for them. It's not quite as good as they would have hoped. The 57%, they could have expected to do a bit better than that in Dundee.
We've just been joined by Brian Taylor, a Scotland political editor. Good to see you, Brian. OK, your take so far?
It looks as if it's going to be a no outcome. There we are. There's the sort of insight that I've become used to down the years. But I think a couple of things emerge from that. If it is a no outcome, if it is a no outcome based upon the prospectus that Gordon Brown advanced towards the close of the campaign, then I think two things arise from that. One, will Westminster generally, in both the lower and upper house, accept Gordon Brown's analysis that the unalloyed sovereignty of Westminster is at an end? I suspect there'll be some who will dispute that. Secondly, the plan itself, the vow, the promise, whatever you like, remains fairly vague. Will detail be put upon that, and will it be in line with the detail that Mr Brown was suggesting, which was that this was in effect home rule for Scotland and would involve substantial tax powers? If it is, what will those tax powers be? Secondly, there's a second issue arising, I think, again, stress, if it is a no, we've now had a couple of big councils and it's still looking towards a no direction. If it is a no, what will the impact be upon the SNP? I suspect that there will obviously be an introspection within the SNP, but I suspect that will be contained introspection, because they will have, first of all, the UK general election to fight, the prospect of seeking to retain their power at Holyrood, and thirdly, above all, perhaps in the short term, trying to drive forward the option of more powers.
If it's a no, and, Brian, you're absolutely right, of course, as you always are, 7 results, so 25 to go, so, we've got to allow for a lot of leeway here. But if it is a no, what is the message that Alex Salmond will deliver? He'll make a statement tomorrow, surely. What will that message be?
He will say the people have spoken. He will say the people have spoken above all in huge numbers. When you're talking about turnouts of 90%, then there is an expectation there of something happening as a result of that volume of people turning out. If even within that, 80 to 90% turnout across parts of Scotland, if the result from that is no, then I'm sure Alex Salmond will drive home the message that there is an expectation of rather more than just tinkering with the powers. Now, if you give a substantial transfer of powers to Scotland, indeed almost any transfer of powers to Scotland, raises the issue of what is to be done with the governance of England, because that's the issue that has been largely subsumed and forgotten until very, very recently. But if you are to do it in the very rushed timetable that is being suggested by Mr. Brown and was endorsed by the others, for reasons of expediency in the close of the campaign, I don't mean that in a cheeky way, they were doing it quite deliberately because they felt they were losing. Then, if you were to do it on that timetable, then the idea of creating a federal system involving England or the regions of England is simply unfeasible.
Is there any area yet to come, Brian, you think, which could deliver exceptionally good news for the Yes campaign and which might change our tune?
It had to be bigger than that in Dundee, frankly. Dundee being a city where Labour has been dominant in the past, but the SNP are very strong at the moment, running the council and holding a number of seats in both parliaments. They had to do better than that, but you're still looking at North Lanarkshire, you're still looking at Glasgow, you're still looking at the other cities. The really big councils have yet to weigh in, just by simple definition of the count being delayed in those, by the volume of votes.
Just interesting to see Nicola Sturgeon there at their headquarters. Unless she may be at the count actually in Glasgow.